of constant failings in leadership for ministers in this government. Now, Madam Chairman, I just want to turn my main focus to the most damning aspect of our family court system: false accusation of parental alienation. Too often, a wealthy parent, as my honourable friend has said, is able to, in effect, purchase custody of a child through certain legal loopholes. Denounced by the United Nations as a regressive pseudo-theory, parental alienation is an argument whereby one parent claims that another is making false abuse claims or is otherwise manipulating the child's view out of hostility towards their ex-partner. The concept has little to no evidence to support it, but is nonetheless one accepted, resulting in children being placed with an abusive parent. On this issue, I would like to pay tribute to the team at the University of Manchester, whose recent research has revealed the dark and rotten roots of this commonly employed tactic, which was invented 40 years ago as a means of aiding perpetrators to cover up the physical and sexual violence to which they'd submitted their spouses and children. Yet, in Britain, this strategy is currently being given free rein in our family courts. Not only are utterly unqualified individuals being allowed to testify as supposed experts in these cases, Kafkas too has overseen the rise in such false allegations. Now, I've spoken with many of my constituents about their treatment at family courts, with one case summarising everything that is wrong with Kafkas: the dangers of parental alienation and the risk posed by a blind insistence on contact, even when a parent is evidently unfit to have any responsibility over a child. Madam Chair, my constituent married a foreign national a decade ago. They had one son, now 8 years old, who until recently was being brought up by his mother in the comfort of a loving, caring home alongside his extended family. Having had the courage to escape the sexual and physical domestic abuse inflicted by her ex-husband, my constituent was granted sole custody of her son. Occasional contact with the father was enforced by the court and complied with by my constituent, despite the clear distress these sessions caused to the child. And yet, when these arrangements broke down, the father was able to launch forced alienation proceedings against his ex-wife to remove the boy from her custody, and this was supported every step of the way by Kafkas. He now has succeeded in depriving my constituent of her only child, despite the rigorous investigation completed by social services within Coventry City Council that concluded that she was an exemplary mother. Thanks to the deeply embedded pro-contact culture of Kafkas, long since identified but allowed to run unreformed for years, an 8-year-old boy is now in the clutches of a man who beat and sexually assaulted my constituent throughout their marriage. Despite mountains of evidence proving his unfitness to have custody of the child, everything was pushed and Kafkas took his side, placing the blame for this on the boy's mother. Perhaps most concerning is that despite the child's distress, a litany of domestic abuse and detailed reports compiled by Coventry City Council in support of my constituent's parenting were all cast aside in the family courts, deploying parental alienation allegation as his chief legal tactic. The boy's father has now won sole custody, leaving my constituents utterly bereft.
Give way.
Yeah, give way.
Obviously, the interests of the child should be paramount, and that was written to the Children Act many years ago. But clearly, this seems to be a failure of that policy, and often the issue of parental alienation is causing great distress, not just for the parents, but also the child that is at the centre of this case. Does she agree with me that Kafkas needs to return to the focus of the interests of the child being paramount in cases such as the one she described?
Absolutely. The role of Kafkas is to protect the child during family proceedings, and currently it seems to be failing in that role. The tragedy is being multiplied by the thousands nationwide. A self-reported survey has suggested allegations of parental alienation are made in up to 70% of family court cases in England and in Wales. In short, this scandal has been allowed to go on for far too long, and it is time for Kafkas and the family courts to be held accountable. So when will the government legislate to bar unqualified so-called experts from the family courts? And when will guidance be published for judges concerning the admissibility of family alienation allegations as evidence in these cases? And why... Oh, yeah, happy to go.
Debate, and I am only sorry that I am not able to stay to give a speech myself. I had a long career in family law. I've acted for mums and dads, husbands and wives. I've acted for families where domestic abuse has been sort of ripped the family apart, and I've seen courts used not only to help people but also to continue the abuse and to continue the control by some people. And what your constituents would have experienced, no doubt, is that there is a lot of delay which will play into the hands of parents who want to use the courts, particularly if they have the child living with them at the time. Now, one of the things I've been campaigning on is to get the Ministry of Justice and the government to really focus on keeping cases out of court, particularly where they're litigates in person, where it's safe to do so. And that will free up court time to deal with the more complex cases that you are talking about more quickly and urgently. So we've got the resource and we've got the proper space that of CAFCAS and people like that to look at. Would she agree with me that that is important? And would you join me and have a coffee with me to discuss this? Because I'd love to get you on board. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The Honourable Member is speaking from her a varied experience, and absolutely I'm more than happy to support her in the campaign and happy to have a cup of coffee to talk about this in further detail as well. I'm sure everyone in this room would love to have a cup of coffee to talk about it as well. So I asked the Minister, why has CAFCAS, almost 3 years after its shameful shortcomings were exposed for all to see, remained largely unreformed? I have written to the Ministry of Justice about my constituent's case on September the 2nd, 2020, and it is a damning indictment that CAFCAS has failed to make any progress in this matter. So will the Minister therefore meet with me to discuss this case further? Madam Chair, until the promised reforms to CAFCAS are completed, until parents can be sure of proper representation and support in the courtroom, and until the family court starts putting the need of children ahead of the vanity of wealthy individuals who can rely on expensive solicitors to exploit a broken system, a broken, underfunded system, the tragedies will only multiply. Inaction is no longer an option. And quite frankly, Madam Chair, in truth, it never was. Thank you.
This House has considered the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service and Family Court Reform. I call Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Miss Cummings. I really am standing here today just to give a general primal scream on behalf of, I'm going to say now, thousands of cases I have seen over the last 7 years of victims of domestic abuse being... I can't put too fine a point on it. They're being abused by the family courts and the system that we are allowing to go on largely in secret, shrouded in total secrecy, although slightly opening up a little bit now, thanks to the effort of some incredibly good investigative journalism and some incredibly brave victims of rape. Who allowed for their cases to be the test cases in that transparency. It is... I cannot sit in front of another mother who has been beaten, raped, abused, coerced, and has had a court in our country take her children from her and give them to the man who raped, beat and abused her. It must be about 5-6 years ago that Women's Aid produced the report 19 Child Homicides, which cited the case over the previous 10 years of 19 children murdered following a decision of a family court to place them with a violent and abusive father. And I pay a huge testament to the families who were involved in those decisions. We are 2 years on now from if it might even be longer, but COVID years make it hard to remember how many years it's been. Really, I'm only 39. I don't count the COVID years. 2 years ago, the harms review, which I think that everybody working in this field was pleased to see the harms review coming out of a very extensive piece of work done by the government, of which I take my hat off to them for doing. However, it dodged one vital and important issue, and that is the issue that my honourable friend, who I'm very grateful for bringing this debate from Coventry North, has raised, and that is the issue of a pro-contact culture. The idea that it is better for... I think we need to fundamentally undermine the idea that it is better for parents, for a child, to have contact with both parents where one of those parents is abusive and violent. And often people will say to me, well, these people aren't necessarily abusive and violent towards the children, but I think you are a bad father if you are abusive and violent towards the mother of your child. That is a fundamental for me. And I'm not saying that in every case of domestic abuse, in the vast majority of cases that I have handled in my lifetime, which is into the tens of thousands, the mothers want fathers to have some form of contact or access to their child. It isn't until we come to the family courts where that becomes completely and utterly distorted and women are cited for being insane. Now, if I'd been raped, beaten, abused for decades, you know, I might take medication for anxiety. Hell, I haven't. That hasn't happened to me, and I do take medication for anxiety. And that will be used to remove a child from a mother. They're calling her mad, hysterical, bad. In a family court, never have been found by social services, might have been considered to be an exemplary mother by social services. And the family courts, with fancy lawyers, often with people, as has been stated by my honourable friend, with often, you know, unfortunately, still the world we live in where men have more money than women, with fancier lawyers argue that women are mad, that they are alienating. And if a woman, we are in a situation where we have allowed parental alienation to get to the point that any woman who tries to protect her child from a violent and abusive partner because of the violence and the abuse will be accused of parent alienation, and that will work against her. So now what we're asking women to do is not safeguard their children in order to have access to them. That's literally, there is a perverse incentive in the system that says if you and your children are being abused by this man, don't mention it, because if you do, you're going to have parent alienation thrown at you. There is absolutely no efficacy in what is being termed as parent alienation. And on to the efficacy point, I wish to point out that the people who we are relying on to make the judgment of parent alienation, I mean, it might as well be my milkman. That's literally how qualified they are. I mean, my milkman, actually, lovely fella, got 6 kids himself. I'd trust him more. We have specialists being paid huge amounts of taxpayers' money operating in our courts across our country, with a specific focus, it seems, on the south. I presume it's because people have more money to spend on it down here, who are not psychologists. They are, I mean, literally it might as well be my milkman, and they're saying, yes, we're seeing signs of parent alienation, and there is no regulation of this. Now, the head of the Family Courts Division has made it incredibly clear that it is up to the government to deal with this issue. It is up to the government to ensure that there is regulation of expert milkmen. I don't feel like I'm taking milkmen down now. They're perfectly good people. Expert witnesses in our family court. Bear in mind, I absolutely will give way.
it's important to listen to the Honourable Member. One of the things the President of the Family Division, Sir Andrew McFarlane, has done is opened up the family courts. More recently, there's pilots, and I think that will be an incredibly good step, because it will shine a light on not only what is going on with people having representation and not having representation, but also in terms of these experts that are being put forward. So I do want to say, even though there is work to be done, there is active effort from the top of the family division to make changes. So I hope you can see that.
I absolutely agree. I think that there's been, Mumby before, who it seemed in his final year as the head of the Family Courts Division, did a sort of a real swan song. I'm going to do something about this, recognising as many people, many brilliant legal minds who work within the family court know where the problems are, and are in fact, it's not just victims I'm here representing and speaking in this primal screen. It is hundreds of solicitors and judges who get in touch with me all the time to tell me about the terrible broken problems in our family court system. And as McFarlane has laid out, the government has got to undertake a piece of work. Basically, the family court's hands are tied. And it is for the government, the ball is in the government's court, to say what they're going to do about these unregulated experts. Now, bear in mind, I am a genuine expert on domestic abuse, with years and years of training, and I have been refused entry into family courts in the past when I have sought to attend along with victims. So, you know, maybe I should do a milk round, and then I'll get in. I feel like I'm fairly certain in my time in this building that I will advance changes around domestic abuse with others. I feel confident about it. I'm starting to lose confidence, actually, that we're ever going to do enough to change the family courts. The Honourable Lady mentioned the pilots, which I'm sure the Minister will go on to mention. They are, at the moment, just pilots, and they seem to be working well. I think it needs to go further, and there needs to be a change into the gladiatorial. There needs to be a much more sense of an inquiry that is ongoing throughout these cases. Practice Direction 12J, which tells us that, you know, that there isn't a presumption of contact in cases where domestic abuse is not worth the paper it's written on, because it's hardly ever used, and never ever, I mean, if all the cases I've seen where people have got convicted rapists and it's not being used in those cases, you've got to be asking yourself some serious questions about whether what the situation we have at the moment is working. And so I suppose that I just want to know, really, from the government, when can we expect the outcome of the review into a pro-contact culture, and what is the hold-up, is what I would like to know. I would like to know why it has taken 2 years on one single point in the harms review about a pro-contact culture. And I would also like to know when, and I've written to the Justice Secretary about this and not yet heard back. I'll cut him some slack. It was only about 2 weeks ago when McFarlane said it. When are we going to stop the use of unregulated experts in our family courts? And just, I suppose, in closing, to the point my honourable friend from Coventry North started on was the issue of legal aid. Whilst the government have, and it was from an amendment that I moved, initially stopped the cross-examination of victims by perpetrators in the family court, I'm afraid to say that the rollout of the advocates that are meant to be doing that work, it seems frankly to be underfunded and an unattractive prospect, and so actually that is faltering at the moment as a system, from what I can tell from the cases that I have seen and reviewed and the members of the family court bar that I speak to. So I just want to know and feel that there is some progress, that I'm not going to get another email tomorrow, which I inevitably will tomorrow, but maybe next week or next year, of a mother who has been beaten and abused and has just had her child removed and is only allowed supervised contact because some man has managed to manipulate the systems in our country to make them feel like she is mad, she is bad, and that he is an absolute angel. If I had a penny, I could, for every case I've seen, I could rebuild the family courts.
We're now starting on the front bench speeches, and I call Alex Cunningham.
Ms Cummins, and an extra special pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon, and I apologise to you and to the House for arriving a few minutes late for this debate. Similarly, I apologise to my honourable friend, the member for Coventry North West, but I congratulate her in securing this important debate. Now, we've had a couple of powerful and persuasive speeches today that demonstrate the urgent need for further reform in the family justice system so that victims of abuse and the children at the centre of proceedings are given the protection from harm and risk of harm that they both need and deserve. And my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley, she spoke in her usual strong and blunt fashion in defence of the victims and the pleas for change. I don't know if my speech will add any additional value to what we've heard this afternoon, but what I would say to her is, please, please, please do not lose confidence in the work that you have championed in this place, because you need to be doing it. I never thought I would manage to make the honourable member for Birmingham Yardley blush, but today I have succeeded. It's been over 2 years since the Ministry of Justice published the harm report and assessed risk of harm to children and parents in private law children cases. The panel who wrote the report said that the extensive evidence submitted to it, and I quote it, unveiled deep-seated and systemic problems with how the family courts identify, assess and manage risk to children and adults. While we, of course, welcome the changes that were brought in by the Domestic Abuse Act, including the ban on cross-examination of victims of abuse by their perpetrators in the family and civil courts, it's clear that much more needs to be done. Women's Aid conducted research with specialist support services and survivors of abuse who have been involved in private children proceedings since the government's implementation plan for the harm report recommendations was published in 2020. They found that the optimism and hope that the publication of the report had brought has been destroyed by government inaction, and that the lack of progress of the report's findings has left them disillusioned and disappointed. Women's Aid also found out from many family court practitioners and professionals their understanding of coercive and controlling behaviour and how perpetrators can and do use family court proceedings as another form of post-separation abuse is still insufficient. Survivors of domestic abuse are left feeling as though their experiences are ignored. The report from Women's Aid noted they feel that, and I quote them again, as mothers they are trapped within a continuum of blame, facing contradictory accusations both of failing to protect their children from the perpetrator and failing to facilitate contact between child and perpetrator. They also identified serious concerns with the issues of parental alienation, and both my colleagues have addressed that this afternoon. Indeed, several of the survivors that Women's Aid spoke to in their research had had their children removed from them as a result of accusation of so-called parental alienation or alienating behaviours when they raised concern about unsafe contact arrangement for their child. As we've heard today already, this apparent belief system has come under increased international scrutiny. Indeed, there are now several countries who refuse to recognise it as a result of the risk it poses of placing a child with an abusive parent. Following a recent survey of over 4,000 court users in England and Wales, it's estimated that allegations of parental alienation are made in nearly 70% of family court cases in England and Wales. That's an astonishing number and underlines the necessity for immediate government action. In these cases, unregulated, self-declared experts like Milton are invited to give evidence, even though they have little to nothing in the way of formal qualifications to do so, and in fact may have a vested financial interest in diagnosing so-called alienation, which they may then be paid to treat. Just last month, Sir Andrew McFarlane, the President of the Family Division in the case of Ree, commented that there was a need for rigour and clarity when instructing psychologists to give expert evidence in family cases, but claimed that the matter of stricter regulation, it is ultimately a matter for Parliament to take action on. So again, I commend my honourable friend for bringing this matter before the House, and I'm aware that she's made other representations to the Ministry of Justice on the matter, to which the Minister has responded, claiming that, and I quote, "It is a matter for the judiciary to determine which experts may be instructed to provide evidence in family law proceedings." This impasse is totally unacceptable. It's an area in which there is a potentially high risk to already vulnerable children. Loud alarm bells are being sounded. The government should be taking action now to investigate. Instead, they're once again demonstrating the dangerous inaction and the lack of forward planning that's become its hallmark. Labour, on the other hand, wholeheartedly support the calls for an urgent inquiry into the use of unregulated psychological experts in the family courts, which have been made by the Victims Commissioner for London, Claire Waxman, alongside lawyers, academics and charity leaders. My colleagues, the Shadow Minister for Victims and Youth Justice and the Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence, have co-signed these representations to the Ministry of Justice. When in government, Labour will also introduce Jade's Law to the statute books, ensuring that men who kill their partners will automatically have parental responsibility removed so they're not able to have a say in their children's lives. This will prevent them from continuing to perpetuate controlling and coercive behaviour on their children and the victim's family, who are likely to be caring for those children. Will the Minister do that? His department has been active in addressing concerns regarding post-separation abuse through the family courts in recent years, as evidenced by the publication of the Harm Report in 2020 and the Domestic Abuse Act, which received royal assent in 2021. So why is the department stopping here when it was beginning to make some real positive steps forward? Can the Minister commit today to action that will help begin to resolve this ongoing crisis in this area? I will now turn to the wider challenges that our family courts are currently facing. As across the rest of the court system, the backlogs in family courts are unacceptably high, and as a result, vulnerable children are left in precarious situations for months on end. The most recent data shows that private children's law cases are taking an average 45 weeks, that's nearly a year, to reach a final order. Cuts to legal aid, and others have raised this issue today, in family cases have led to a huge increase in litigants in person who have been forced to represent themselves, who actually end up costing the government a significant amount because they take up so much more of a judge's sitting time than a represented individual normally would. I was pleased to hear the Lord Chancellor back in November 2021, when he was before the Justice Select Committee, say that he was in the market for something quite drastic and bold, particularly in private family cases. But I'm sad to say that ambition appears to have disappeared. Instead, the backlog in the family court continues to rise, creating substantial anxiety and stress for families, and most importantly, for vulnerable children, at what is already an extremely difficult time in their lives. Ms Cummins, I've been spending a lot of time recently reflecting on how we can reduce the pain and suffering of going through the family court process. The debate we're having feels particularly timely to me, as I have met a number of family court practitioners, including at the North East Family Drug and Alcohol Court, which I visited on Monday. I was hugely impressed by the work they're doing. I saw firsthand the value and benefits of a greater use of non-adversarial and problem-solving approaches in the family court. I also had positive feedback regarding the Pathfinder pilots in Dorset and North Wales, which are exploring a more inquisitorial approach in private family proceedings. An additional strength of the Pathfinder model is that CAFCAS do substantially more work up front in the process, which the court benefits from as it moves through the proceedings, though we've heard today about the resource challenges for CAFCAS, which would currently prevent this positive work being rolled out nationally. As a final point, what so many experts I speak to stress is the importance of access to that early legal advice in these cases to ensure they end up in the most appropriate part of the system. One arm of that is ensuring that cases which do not need to go to court are kept out of it by early referral to mediation services and alternative dispute resolution. And the other arm is ensuring that those cases that do need to go through the legal process are referred into it at as early a stage as possible. These cases deal with challenging and highly emotive circumstances. Even the most straightforward family separation causes pain and anxiety. The impact these cases have, especially for the children involved with them, can last a lifetime. I hope the Minister can provide reassurances that these urgent issues raised today are being worked on by his department, but also I hope that campaigners can take confidence in the fact that Labour takes these issues extremely seriously and fully support the call for an urgent inquiry into the regulation of experts in the family courts. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And can I thank the Honourable Member for Coventry North West for securing a debate on this important subject. The focus of the family court must always be on acting on the best interests of the children. The Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, CAFCAS, plays an integral role in England in both representing children in the family court and advising the court on what is safe and in their best interest. It's CAFCAS which ensures that children's voices are at the heart of the family justice system. CAFCAS is the largest employer of qualified social workers in England and supports over 140,000 children each year, speaking up for those children during what can be an extremely difficult time. And I appreciate members wish to raise cases where things don't go right, but it is also important to pay tribute to the work that CAFCAS does and the hard-working social workers who do support 140,000 children. It is wrong to suggest that the whole of CAFCAS is failing children in this country. That is simply not fair on the organisation and the social workers who have a very difficult job to do. That is not saying that mistakes are made or things don't go wrong. To try and paint the whole service as a failure is simply not correct. So can I just make some progress, if I may? And I turn members to the recent Ofsted inspection of January of this year. Ofsted said that CAFCAS was highly effective. It has meant that those children in situations who are in greatest risk continue to be promptly allocated a children's guardian or family court advisor. So I don't want to take issue with the problems that honourable members have raised, but I did want to put on record that the description of CAFCAS as some dystopian organisation getting everything wrong is simply unfair. Many people working in a very difficult situation, doing a lot of good work for children in a difficult situation. So let me move on to some of the things that we are doing in terms of ensuring that CAFCAS has the capacity and the funding. In terms of the additional funding, coping with the pandemic backlogs, we have ensured that the CAFCAS budget has been increased by over 8.4 million, over the baseline about 140 million. I have to say that also we are ensuring that the sitting days for the family court have been increased in both elements of the family court. Now, I don't want to dwell on the particular dry bits of what the family courts have to do, because I appreciate that members have raised some specific issues, which I will do best to answer. And where I can't answer them, I will seek that my honourable colleague, Lord Bellamy, who covers this particular portfolio, provides a more detailed answers to the honourable members, or indeed, if the honourable members wish to meet Lord Bellamy to go through these issues in more depth, I'm very happy to facilitate that. But I do appreciate that I don't have the depth of knowledge that other members have, or my noble friend, Lord Bellamy. But I did want to also point out the issue of legal aid. So we spend £830 million on civil legal aid. And just in the last couple of months, we've increased the amount of money by an extra 30 million just to support those people who need legal aid when in a situation of domestic violence. So I don't think it is true to say that we are leaving victims of domestic violence without legal aid, having just increased it by £13 million. I do recognise that there is a long-term reform needed of family courts, and we do recognise that many of these issues are wide-ranging and they are complex to ensure that the vulnerable court users, such as those who have experienced domestic abuse, continue to be supported. And we do want to continue to build on the response to the 2020 report on the risk of harm in private law proceedings. The Harm Panel report, we've delivered on all of the short-term commitments. And those measures include through the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, prohibiting the cross-examination of victims by perpetrators, and providing automatic eligibility for special measures for victims of domestic abuse in the family courts. In December 2022, the Family Procedure Rule Committee also agreed rule and practice direction changes to ensure that independent domestic violence advisors and other special support services can accompany a party into court. These changes are expected to come into force on the 6th of April. The government continues to work closely with the domestic abuse sector to ensure survivor voices remain central to family court reform. And I look forward to the upcoming launch of the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's Monitoring and Reporting Pilot, which will ensure we continue to understand the impact of family court proceedings on children and families. And if I may just touch, Ms Cummings, on a couple of issues that have been raised. The Shadow Minister raised...
Back to the issue of legal aid. Not everybody in family court proceedings can actually qualify for legal aid, but I wonder whether he would conduct an assessment of the time that's been wasted in courts because people are litigants in person and take up so much more time of the judge, which of course could be saved and save the government money if those people had access to legal aid.
As always, from the Honourable Gentleman, I will give very careful consideration to any of his requests, and I will report back to him as to what we can do on that particular issue. But he mentioned the family mediation. Obviously, a big drive of the reform is to keep the families out of a court process. That is not helpful. It is keeping them away from the adversarial process, and the investment of about £7.3 million in terms of providing the mediation vouchers has been a success. It is working. So.
Would he enter or want anyone in his family to enter into mediation with their rapist?
I'm going to tread very carefully here. I grew up in a home of domestic violence, so I understand the issue actually quite closely. And so I am very careful to ensure that the victims of domestic abuse are able to get justice, but I also accept the... No, hang on a moment, let me finish before she judges what I'm going to say. I personally would not want that to happen, okay? That is not my decision, but I accept it is a very... Unfortunately, as the Honourable Lady knows, the justice system is never fair. It is often too processy. And the point she makes has been well landed, and it's points that we will continue to have those discussions with the judiciary. But the process, as you know, is not always balanced, and that's our job to try and remove those imbalances. The point has been well made, and I will ensure that is conveyed to the judiciary. In terms of some of the other issues that she has raised and other members have raised, in terms of parental alienation, in terms of the issue, so if I can just check my notes, in terms of, so first of all, if I may turn to the use of experts, we do have clearly a disagreement of opinion between, first of all, the regulation of experts is a matter for DHSC, and it's something that I'm more than happy to take up with the relevant minister. In terms of the ability or not to refuse a so-called expert is a matter for judicial discretion. If the so-called expert is not someone that the judiciary believes to be an expert, it is up to the judiciary to say, we are not going to accept that person as an expert. The regulation is a separate issue, and that, as I said, that is one that I'm more than happy to take up with colleagues in DHSC. But in terms of the current situation, the judiciary do have the ability to reject what you and I would call in common parlance so-called experts, though that is the current situation. If I can turn to the issue that was raised in terms of how we deal with the presumption of parental involvement, which I think it has been raised. This is an important and complex issue, and we do want to ensure that any recommendations resulting from the review are based on a solid understanding of the way this presumption is currently applied and how this affects both parents and children. The review will be concluded later this year, and a publication date will be announced in due course. If I may, Ms Cummins, I just wanted to check that I've covered everything else. Just one thing on terms of the parental responsibilities. That can already be limited by the courts. And again, in terms of Jade's law, my understanding is that Minister Agar and Lord Bellamy has already met with the Honourable Member for Ayling and Deeside to discuss the case and how those issues can be pursued. If the Honourable Members want to know more, then I'm clearly very, very happy to write or ask Lord Bellamy to write. But that issue has been and is being explored with the Honourable Member who's raised it in the House several times. I don't want to diminish the actual complexity of the issues raised today, but I did want to put on record that all of the issues being raised are being dealt with, and I do appreciate the individual cases that members will raise where they feel the system is failing. I cannot diminish the individual's experience of that, but I do feel we need to have some balance that 140,000 children are supported by CAFCAS in difficult circumstances, and to suggest that they get it wrong all the time is not fair. But the points raised by honourable members opposite have been well landed, and after today I will ensure that Lord Bellamy and I sit down to review the issues that have been raised, and if honourable members wish a meeting with Lord Bellamy, I am more than happy to facilitate that. Thank you, Ms Cummins.
What I may to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the point made by the Minister. I don't think anybody in this debate was saying that those working for CAFCAS were not trying their best or that they get it wrong all the time. But we are acknowledging the fact that there are issues that need to be urgently addressed and that are causing severe harms to both women and children in which CAFCAS are meant to protect. But also we recognise that the reason why these failures are happening is due to government inaction and the fact that reforms need to happen and there needs to be proper funding within the judiciary system. Now, I just want to thank everybody who participated in this debate. I'd like to start by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley, for detailing the problem with parental alienation and unqualified experts. She has long campaigned for this important subject and rightfully calls for a reform. I'd also like to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Enfield Southgate, who is no longer in the seat, for highlighting the importance of protecting vulnerable children. A lot of members spoke in this debate, or intervene in this debate, and I'd like to thank the member for Strangford and the member for Stroud, who all raised their concerns about lack of access to legal aid in the court system, parental alienation and unqualified experts, but also courtroom backlog. Madam Chair, no mother should be penalised for safeguarding their children, and so the government needs to desperately address the failures of CAFCAS and reform the family court system. I would just also like to end by just noting two key points. First of all is that I noticed that the Minister did not answer all my questions, and I look forward to receiving a written response from the Minister on those questions. And secondly, I also look forward to meeting with the Minister, hopefully very soon, to discuss some of the issues that I raised in today's debate. And I look forward to reviewing the review that he spoke about once published. Just to end, Madam Chair, I would just like to end by saying, by stressing, that after 13 years of failure, the criminal justice system is on its knees and in desperate need of funding and reform, and it's only then that victims like my constituents are able to get justice. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service and Family Court Reform. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. This sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.